let's be honest here, like the United States is already crossing the line big time because now we're sending cluster munitions to Ukraine.
So basically, by their own definition, that would make Biden a war criminal.
Exactly.
I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic. And we are unapologetically outspoken. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Freedom Friday. And before we start the show today, for those of you who don't stick around to listen to the ending of our podcast, which, by the way, you should at least once because we've recently changed it and added some cool new information to it. And we have some super awesome, unapologetically outspoken stickers now. So you can check them out on our Etsy page. There's a link in the show notes, or you can go to www.etsy.com/shop/UO Patriot Chicks. And we could not spell out unapologetically outspoken because Etsy only allows so many letters to be in a shop name. So that's what we came up with. But anyway, please check it out, tell your friends, and buy a sticker to support the show. And if you join our Patreon, you'll receive a sticker for free. And like we talked about the other day, we're going to be adding episodes to our Patreon once a week. And we'll also be adding limited edition stickers to our Etsy shop throughout the year as well. So we would love it if you guys can show your patriotism and support for the show by sporting an unapologetically outspoken sticker on your water bottle or laptop or wherever you feel like putting one. And with that said, let's move on to today's episode. So today we're going to give an update on what the fuck is going on with Ukraine. So on July 11th, the G7 and all of the other member countries of NATO met at the NATO summit in Lithuania, and they issued a statement denying Ukraine access to NATO membership. And they basically said that Ukraine can join NATO, but not until the allies all agree and certain conditions are met. And some of those conditions include demanding more democratic and security reform from Kiev or however you pronounce it, before Ukraine can join. So I'm assuming that the optic of Zelensky announcing there won't be an election if the war continues probably didn't come across well in terms of promoting, quote, democracy. And before this decision was made, Zelensky made what I think is a rather threatening statement, indicating that the United States was the deciding factor in Ukraine's membership. And specifically, he stated, this was the day before, quote, "The U.S. decides today whether Ukraine will get invited to NATO. This is today's situation, and it's a fact. The majority of NATO countries support inviting Ukraine to NATO. Those who have their doubts look only at President Biden, and he knows this depends on him. It will be his decision." Well, Biden responded that Ukraine isn't ready to join NATO. And I'll be honest, I was shocked by that. And once again, disturbed to admit that I actually agree with Biden on something. And in an interview with CNN, he said that he didn't think Ukraine should get membership into NATO because that would mean a hot war between Russia and the West. And this same sentiment was echoed by several U.S. officials, including U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who in another CNN interview stated, quote, "Look, I understand Ukraine's desire to be in NATO as fast as possible. That is absolutely their right to seek admission and press for it and to advocate for it. But every NATO ally, including the United States, needs to look squarely at the fact that admission of Ukraine into NATO at this juncture means war with Russia. This is an inescapable fact." And then House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCaul stated, quote, "I think first they need to have to win the counteroffensive. Before joining NATO, Ukraine should have a ceasefire, then negotiate a peace settlement. We cannot admit Ukraine into NATO immediately. That would put us at war with Russia under Article 5. And that's Article 5 relating to the compact with NATO. And then even Democrat members of Congress are in agreement with this decision. Senator Chris Coons from Delaware, who serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, stated, quote, "We can't admit Ukraine to NATO right now. There's a war going on that has to be resolved." So clearly, most of these other nations and the United States are on the same page. So the following day, after Ukraine was denied admittance into NATO, the G7 met again, and this time they issued a joint declaration of support for Ukraine. And at the conclusion of the meeting, Biden commented that this joint declaration is a, quote, powerful statement of our commitment to Ukraine that will last long into the future. As Ukraine defends its freedom today and as it rebuilds the future, we're going to help Ukraine build a strong, capable defense across land, air, and sea. And we're going to be there for as long as that takes. Biden also kissed Zelensky's ass as usual. And according to a recent Epoch Times article, after the meeting, he met with Zelensky and told him that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was straight out of the 14th century, and he praised Zelensky's courage and resilience. Biden also talked about how the Ukraine could receive Israel-style security guarantees from the U.S., which, according to Jake Sullivan, means that the U.S. would provide various forms of military assistance, intelligence and information sharing, cyber support, and other forms of material support so that Ukraine can both defend itself and deter future aggression. So, Stephanie, aren't we already doing this with the billions of dollars worth of military equipment and like straight up cash that we've been sending to the Ukraine for the past year? I mean, not only have we been sending weapons and money, but aren't we even paying for Ukrainian pensions?
Yeah. I mean, once again, I feel like it's nothing but weakness that we're portraying. And the fact that all these countries are looking to Biden, it is just a joke. He has no idea what's going on. But I, just like you, I'm surprised that he did not think that Ukraine should join NATO at this time. So I do agree with that. But my whole question is, why are we kissing Ukraine's ass? You know, like Zelensky should be kissing our ass or Biden's ass or whatever, because, you know, I mean, we've given over $100 billion now. And I'm sure it has something to do with all of the Biden's dirty money that was made in Ukraine for his family while he was VP. And, you know, I completely agree with the fact that Ukraine should not be a part of NATO right now. Like that would officially put us in World War III. So I think that it's the right call by Biden. Maybe he's doing the right thing finally for once. Or maybe it's just the fact that impeachment is on the table and he's realizing he better start treading lightly.
Well, apparently, all of the shit that we have been doing, that quite honestly, we should be doing for our own fucking country, doesn't seem to be enough because, like a spoiled, entitled child, Zelensky is pitching a fit and is apparently, quote, frustrated with the slow pace of assistance from the United States. So after the summit, Zelensky criticized the G7 about their decision not to admit Ukraine into NATO, and he posted on Twitter, quote, "It's unprecedented and absurd when a timeframe is not set neither for the invitation nor for Ukraine's membership, while at the same time vague wording about conditions is added for even inviting Ukraine." And then he also said that Ukraine deserves respect. Stephanie, don't you think this is insane?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. He sounds like a spoiled brat. And it boggles my mind after everything that the United States has given him that this is his reaction. I would tell him to go fuck off at this point, but to put things a little bit nicer, I would use this as an opportunity to just cut off this absurd funding that we keep sending over. It's like every time I look at the news, oh, there's billions of dollars more that we're sending over there. And I think this could be a great way to end that and part ways. But I mean, you and I know that's never going to happen. Like the Biden administration would then have to admit that they were wrong getting us into this mess in the first place. And we both know that they never hold themselves accountable for anything. So I don't see that happening, but it's just absolutely absurd that this is Zelensky's reaction.
Yeah, and according to an article in an online publication called Ukrainska Pravda, Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Kuleba, has also commented that Ukraine will never agree to alternatives to NATO membership. The article reports that in an interview with Radio Liberty, Kuleba stated, quote, "We will not give up NATO membership because everyone understands, all our partners understand, that Ukraine's membership in the alliance is the most robust guarantee that there will not be another war in Europe. All other security guarantees are fine, but there's no alternative to NATO membership. This is the President Zelensky's firm position, and it will be enacted through the decisions that are being taken." I'm sorry to tell you, sir, but you're already involved in a war, because I don't know that I would call this a conflict at this point. Would you, Stephanie?
No, it's been going on for what, like 2 damn years so far? Give me a
Almost.
break.
Yeah. And let's be honest here. The United States is already crossing the line big time, because now we're sending cluster munitions to Ukraine. And even some of our greatest allies, including the UK, Canada, Spain, Germany, New Zealand, and several other countries, have publicly made negative statements criticizing the US for this move. There's even a Democrat-led effort in Congress to stop the Biden administration from doing this, and it's becoming a bipartisan effort led by Republican Representative Matt Gaetz. So, in case you haven't heard, on July 7th, Biden announced that we are sending yet another $800 million military package to Ukraine, which includes the very controversial and dangerous weapons called cluster munitions. And apparently, for most countries, this is a violation of several international treaties. So, back in 2008, there was a convention on cluster munitions agreement that was signed by 11 nations. This happened in Oslo, Norway. And the whole point was to prohibit the use, production, transfer, and stockpiling of cluster munitions. But the catch is that the United States, the Ukraine, and Russia aren't any of the countries that signed this agreement. So technically, we're not in violation of any treaty. And basically, these weapons are called cluster bombs or cluster munitions, and they're delivered by missiles, rockets, and aircraft. And when they're deployed, they release a bunch of smaller bombs called bomblets that cover a very large area. And these bomblets can indiscriminately kill innocent civilians and children. And on top of that, not all of the bomblets explode immediately, and so they end up exploding later or being found by kids. There was an article in the Epic Times back that talked about how back in August of 2022, the Landmine and Cluster Munition Monitor released a report stating that 97% of all cluster munition casualties are after-action civilians. In surveys where ages of victims were registered, 66% of victims were children. There's also an organization called Human Rights Watch, which stated, quote, "Cluster munitions used by Russia and Ukraine are harming civilians now and will leave bomblets behind that will continue to do so for many years." So the Biden administration is defending this decision by saying that the military is only selecting cluster munitions with a dud rate of no more than 2.5%, which they believe means would have a lower chance of bomblets failing to explode when they're released, compared to Russia's cluster munitions, which they say have a dud rate between 30 and 40%. Now, Stephanie, you're going to love this, because once again, RFK Jr. has totally slammed Biden for this decision. And he posted on a series of comments in Twitter stating, quote, "Last year, White House Secretary Jen Psaki called the use of cluster bombs a war crime. Now, President Biden plans to send them to Ukraine. Biden was opposed to cluster bombs in 1982 as well, when he opposed their sale to Israel. What happened to his conscience?"
So basically, by their own definition, that would make Biden a war criminal, since this is a crime against humanity with innocent victims. I mean, 66% are children. Are you kidding me?
Exactly. Yeah, the hypocrisy with this administration is so blatant, it's ridiculous. And even hardcore Democrats like Representative Sarah Jacobs from California and Ilhan Omar from Minnesota are actually against this. And they have co-sponsored an amendment to the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act to ban export licensing to transfer cluster munitions from the U.S. abroad. And Jacobs made a press statement last week and said, quote, "Many of our partners don't support this move, with many having already banned cluster munitions from their stockpiles. We've seen Russia's horrific use of cluster munitions in Ukraine, and we shouldn't cede the moral high ground by criticizing their actions and then deciding to send cluster munitions ourselves." And then Omar similarly stated, quote, "If the U.S. is going to be a leader on international human rights, we must not participate in human rights abuses." So, after hearing about their proposed amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, Matt Gaetz stepped up to say that even though he's criticized Jacobs a lot in the past, this is like one common ground issue for both Democrats and Republicans. So, he decided to co sponsor the amendment and said, we have an opportunity with bipartisanship to stand against the warmongering Bidens. So Gaetz commented that cluster munitions have been used throughout the world's bloodiest and most inhumane wars in places like Laos, I don't even know how you pronounce that word.
Laos, I think. I don't know.
There, Lebanon, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Syria. He said, quote, children will be left without limbs and without parents because of this decision by Joe Biden if we do not work together in a bipartisan fashion to stop it. But despite the lack of support from both Republicans and Democrats, the Washington Examiner reported yesterday that U.S. cluster munitions have already been delivered to Ukraine. And so, of course, Ukraine is like loving this, right? Back on July 8th, the Ukrainian Minister of Defense, Oleksiy Rezunov, stated, quote, we welcome the decision of the U.S. to provide Ukraine with the new liberation weapons that will significantly help us deoccupy our territories while saving the lives of Ukrainian soldiers. For this, we need to inflict losses on the enemy, war criminals, rapists, and looters who are occupying our territory. The more losses we inflict on them, the more lives of Ukrainian people we will be able to save. And then he also stated that Russia has been indiscriminately using cluster munitions since day one of the war, but Ukraine, in their goodness, will only use them for the, quote, deoccupation and won't be using them in urban areas. And he said that they're going to maintain a strict record of where these cluster bombs are maintained, and that once the, quote, deoccupation is achieved, Ukraine will prioritize the cleanup of unexploded cluster munitions according to their records. So, Stephanie, do you honestly believe that the president, aka dictator of Ukraine, is really going to play by these rules of only using them for, quote, deoccupation? And what the fuck does that really entail anyway? And do you think that they're really going to meticulously track and prioritize picking up all of these unexploded bomblets?
Of course not. Of course not. And, first of all, when you're talking about Matt Gaetz, who is like completely far right end of the spectrum, and then Ilhan Omar and Jacobs completely on the left end of the spectrum, and they're coming together and agreeing on something, that should speak very loudly to everybody. Like maybe this is the one thing that can unite the Democrats and Republicans, because like, what the fuck? This is insane. And, I think at the beginning, a lot of people were on board with helping Ukraine. Like this whole thing was supposed to last, wasn't it like 2 days, they said in the beginning? Yep. And I don't think that anyone was expecting Biden to send all of our money and military equipment there while we have issues right here in America that we can't fund. And I'm glad that the Democrats are finally seeing the negative impact of this. And I would guess that most Americans like never would have supported any of this in the first place if they would have known that it would be this long and drawn out and expensive. And like we said before, this whole thing started because we're supposedly defending democracy. And yet this is a country where they're not even going to allow elections. And now on top of that, we're going to be participating in war crimes. Like, are you kidding me? I mean, I don't know how we can allow this to continue. And the only way it's going to stop, again, is for Democrats and Republicans to come together. And I'm glad to see that they can agree on cluster bombs. But like, honestly, I don't think that's going to be enough to stop this and turn this ship around. So, we'll see, I guess.
Well, you know what else too? I don't know if you saw this, but when Biden was talking about all this in one of these interviews, he also stated that we're low on 155 millimeter artillery ammunition rounds. And so there's all this like outrage about that. And at the same time, like he's basically saying, yeah, we're low on all this stuff, but we're just going to keep sending equipment to Ukraine. Fuck our own military.
Right. Yeah. So now if we do have World War III or China decides to invade us or whatever, we're fucked because we've just given everything to this democratic Ukraine that's not going to hold elections and bans political opponents. Great.
And we've announced it to the world.
Yeah, exactly. Well, some other breaking news today, right from the whitehouse.gov, is Biden augmenting the active armed forces of the United States for the effective conduct of Operation Atlantic Resolve in and around the United States European Command's area of responsibility. Tara, please translate for all of us.
Basically, yeah, he has given authorization for 3,000 American reservists to be ready to deploy. And we've already sent tens of thousands of troops there since last year when Russia first invaded Ukraine. And apparently, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin doesn't yet have plans to deploy these reservists. But according to an article I read in Politico, this means basically our active duty forces are stretched beyond their capacity. So now we're going to start sending reserves.
Great. So we're low on ammo. We're in a huge deficit, but we keep spending money on Ukraine. And now we're sending our reservists over there.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we're in real good shape here. Thanks, Biden. You're doing a great job. Oh my gosh. Well, this was
Happy Friday.
not a very happy episode. They never are on Fridays, though, which is why we come back to you on Monday with something a little more positive. So just hang in there. We'll be back with some motivation on Monday. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and thanks for tuning in. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.